Welcome back, everyone, to Eternal Light, a place that walks alongside true values. Today, Eternal Light will reveal to you who you truly are. You might be surprised, you might have many questions running through your mind, but don't worry. Stay with us until the end of this video, and you will find great value. If something resonates with you, feel free to comment below and share your thoughts. Now, hit the like button to stay awake, stay focused, and let's begin. And may God bless you all. The chosen one marked before birth. Have you ever felt that you were different from others? That there was something deeper, something stronger, an invisible thread binding you to a mission you don't yet fully understand? Maybe you've been misunderstood, rejected, or wounded without knowing why. But listen to this. You are not a coincidence. You are not an accident in this vast universe. The Bible affirms this profound truth in Jeremiah 1 verse 5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. You were marked before your first breath touched the air, before your eyes ever opened to see the light. God knew you, and not only did he know you, he set you apart for something greater than yourself. The chosen one, burden and glory. History proves that the chosen ones never have an easy path. Look at Moses, a man whose life was spared from death as a baby in the river. How many other infants perished under Pharaoh's decree? Why was Moses the one who survived? Why did an Egyptian princess take pity on a Hebrew child and raise him as her own? Because Moses was marked. The same is true for Joseph. If you've ever felt betrayed, think of Joseph, the young man whose own brothers threw him into a pit and sold him as a slave. Why? Because he had a dream. Because he carried something that his brothers could not understand or accept. But even in prison, even when forgotten, Joseph held on to his faith. And when God's appointed time arrived, he was no longer a slave. He was the ruler of all Egypt. Then there was David, the shepherd boy nobody believed in. When the prophet Samuel came to anoint the future king, David wasn't even considered. But God does not see as man sees. In the lonely fields, tending to sheep, David was being prepared, learning faithfulness, courage, and trust. And when his time came, he defeated Goliath, not by his own strength, but by the power of the one who had chosen him. The signs of the chosen one. If you are chosen, you will recognize it through clear signs. 1. You cannot live an ordinary life. No matter how hard you try, something always feels unfinished. You never completely blend in. 2. You will face greater challenges than others. The chosen ones walk through the fire because fire refines gold. 3. You have a calling that you cannot ignore. You may try to run, but the call will follow you. Jonah tried to flee, but he still had to return. 4. You will doubt yourself at times. Even Moses said, "Lord, I cannot speak well," but God does not choose the perfect, he perfects the chosen. 5. You will bring change. The chosen ones do not live for themselves. They walk in God's purpose, and their lives impact others. Your mission awaits. Maybe you feel lost. Maybe you wonder why your life has been filled with so many trials. But remember this, if you are walking through hardship, it is because you are being prepared for something greater. You were not born to simply exist. You are not an accident among billions of people. You are marked, you are called, you are chosen. And God did not make a mistake in choosing you. The question is, are you ready to answer the call? The chosen one, purposeful isolation. There is a truth that few are willing to face. Those who are chosen are often alone, not because they are inadequate, nor because the world has turned its back on them, but because they belong to something greater than themselves, something those around them have yet to comprehend. Have you ever felt lost, even in the middle of a crowd? Have you ever wondered why you can't seem to fit in as easily as others? Have you ever felt that no matter how hard you try, you are always different? If your answer is yes, then perhaps you are one of the chosen ones, and the isolation you experience is not a punishment, it is preparation. Loneliness before the calling. Those whom God chooses must walk through a wilderness season before stepping into their destiny. God never sends someone into battle without first training them. And there is no place that shapes a person better than isolation. Think of Moses. Before he became the great leader of Israel, before he stood before Pharaoh, before the miracle of the Red Sea, Moses spent 40 years alone in the wilderness. A former Egyptian prince, now reduced to a wandering shepherd in barren hills. Do you think he ever felt forgotten? Certainly. But it was in that isolation that he learned humility, patience, and most importantly, how to hear God's voice. Jesus too walked this path. Before he began his ministry, before his first miracle, before preaching about the kingdom of heaven, he spent 40 days in the wilderness. No friends, no family, no one by his side, only him and God. Yet in that solitude, he prepared for his mission to redeem humanity. And what about Joseph? If anyone understood the feeling of being abandoned, it was Joseph. From being his father's beloved child to being sold into slavery by his own brothers. Wrongfully imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit, Joseph spent years in the shadows of obscurity. Yet in those lonely years, God was preparing him for the day he would rise to become Egypt's prime minister, saving thousands from famine. When God isolates you, he is preparing you. Maybe you are in your own wilderness season right now. Maybe you feel like the world has forgotten you. But remember, isolation is not a punishment, it is preparation. God does not want you to be distracted by the noise of the world. He wants you to focus. He wants you to hear his voice more clearly. And sometimes the only way to do that is to place you in a space where no one else can follow. The weak fear loneliness. They dread silence, the absence of someone to talk to, the lack of companionship. But the strong, those who are truly called, understand that those moments of solitude are the very moments when God is working on them. Signs that you are being prepared. If you are experiencing isolation, consider these signs. 1. Your relationships seem to be shifting. People you were once close to may begin to drift away. Not because you did something wrong, but because God is setting you apart for something different. 2. You feel like no one truly understands you. Sometimes you try to explain what you're going through, but no one seems to get it. That's because you are walking a path they have never walked. 3. Doors that once seemed open suddenly close. Opportunities you thought were meant for you suddenly vanish. But remember, when one door closes, it is because God is directing you towards something better. 4. You feel an overwhelming urge to pray. When you start feeling an intense longing to seek God, it is a sign that He is drawing you closer to Him. Embrace isolation as a gift. There will be days when you feel exhausted. There will be moments when you want to give up. But remember, even in your loneliest moments, you are not abandoned. Like Moses, you may be in the desert. Like Joseph, you may be in the prison. Like Jesus, you may be walking alone in the wilderness. But all of these were merely preparations for something greater. Isolation is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of calling. You are not forgotten. You are not forsaken. You are being prepared. And one day, when the time is right, God will bring you out of the wilderness, placing you exactly where He destined you to be before you were even born. The chosen one, trials are meant to forge you. There is a truth that those who are chosen will inevitably face. Their destined path is not paved with roses, but with jagged stones, unexpected pitfalls, and seemingly insurmountable walls. Trials are not signs of failure, they are signs of preparation. You can see this clearly in the lives of the chosen ones in the Bible. From Joseph, who was sold into slavery before rising to the position of Egypt's prime minister, to David, who was hunted like a criminal before being anointed as king, or even Jesus himself, who endured suffering before completing the redemption of humanity. They were not exempt from trials, they were forged by them. And so are you. If you feel like your life is filled with challenges, if it seems like everything is working against you, do not despair, because perhaps you are not just an ordinary person. Perhaps you are one of the chosen, and your trials are not meant to destroy you, they are meant to forge you. Fire purifies gold, trials purify people. It is said that gold only becomes pure when refined by fire. Without heat, there is no purification. Without pressure, there is no transformation. Raw gold may look like any ordinary metal, but when it undergoes the refining process, all impurities are burned away, leaving behind a radiant, precious substance. Have you ever considered that the trials you are facing are like that fire? Look at the life of Joseph. As Jacob's beloved son, he grew up with privileges his brothers did not have. But then, because of a dream given to him by God, his life turned upside down. The very people who were supposed to protect him became the ones who betrayed him, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned, forgotten in a dungeon. If Joseph had been an ordinary person, he would have broken under the weight of it all. But he was not ordinary. He was chosen. And because of that, trials could not destroy him. They only made him stronger. In the end, the very trials Joseph endured became the key to saving an entire nation from famine. If he had not been sold into slavery, he would not have been in Egypt. If he had not been thrown into prison, he would not have had the chance to interpret the dream of Pharaoh's cupbearer. If he had not endured years of hardship, he would not have gained the wisdom to manage a kingdom during a crisis. God never wastes a trial. What you are enduring today may be the very thing that will save someone tomorrow. The chosen are always tested. If your life is full of struggles, remember that you are not the first to walk this path, and one Moses, the chosen deliverer. Before Moses could lead the Israelites out of Egypt, he had to endure a journey of hardship. From being an Egyptian prince to a wanted fugitive, from holding great power to becoming an unknown shepherd in the wilderness. But this was not failure, it was preparation. God needed a leader with humility, compassion, and patience. And Moses could not learn these qualities while living in the Egyptian palace. He had to learn them in the wilderness, among the sheep, under the vast sky, with only the wind and stars as his companions. You may be in your own wilderness right now, but do not despair, because the wilderness is where God trains those he has chosen. 2. David, from outcast to king of Israel. Imagine being a shepherd boy. No one pays attention to you. Even your own father does not think you are important. But then one day a prophet appears and anoints you as king. You would think that from that moment on life would become easier, right? But no. David did not ascend to the throne immediately. Instead, he had to run for his life. He lived as an outlaw, faced betrayals, and fought battles that seemed never-ending. If David had not been chosen, he would have given up long ago. But he knew that his trials were not the end of his story. They were simply chapters in a greater narrative. And in the end, he not only became king, but one of the greatest kings in Israel's history. If you are misunderstood, if you are despised, if you are fighting battles, remember, you are not alone. David walked this path before you, and if God could take him from the fields to the throne, he can do the same for you. Your trials will become your testimony. One day you will look back and realize that everything you went through had a purpose. The tears you cried will become the water that quenches someone else's thirst for hope. Your scars will become stories that give strength to those who need it. Your battles will become a testimony for those walking the same road. When Joseph faced the brothers who had once sold him, he did not hold a grudge. Instead, he said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Genesis 50:20. One day you too will be able to say the same, because your trials are not the end, they are just the beginning. God never abandons those he has chosen. You are not forgotten. You are not forsaken. You are being forged. And when the time comes, you will step into the purpose he has ordained for you since before you were born. The chosen one, stepping into your calling. If there's one thing that all chosen ones must face, it is the defining moment. Will they step into their destiny or not? Not everyone does. The world is full of people with extraordinary potential who never dare to step out of their comfort zones. They hear the call, but they hesitate. They feel their hearts stir for something greater, but they are afraid. And so, they hold back. That is why Jesus said in Matthew 22:14, "For many are called, but few are chosen." It is not because God only chooses a select few. It is because only a few dare to accept being chosen. And the question for you is, are you ready? A calling is not an easy choice. Imagine you are living an ordinary, stable life. One day, someone comes to you and says that you are destined for something great, that you will change the world. that you will face immense challenges but will also achieve unimaginable glory. Would you accept that calling? Perhaps you think that if God chooses someone, they will immediately rejoice and step into their mission. But in reality, even the greatest figures in the Bible had moments of hesitation. 1. Moses, the hesitant one. Moses, who freed the Israelites from Egypt, was one of the first to reject God's calling. When God appeared to him in the burning bush and commanded him to rescue his people, Moses responded with a series of excuses as to why he couldn't do it. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Exodus 3. Moses didn't believe he was capable. He didn't believe others would listen to him. He was afraid. But what made Moses one of the chosen was not his confidence from the start. It was that, in the end, he stepped into his calling despite his fear. And when he accepted, miracles began to happen. 2. Jonah, the runaway. Some people don't just hesitate, they actively run away from their calling. Jonah is a prime example. When God told him to go to Nineveh and call the people to repentance, what did he do? He boarded a ship and went in the opposite direction. But how long can you run from God? Jonah learned that no one can escape their destiny. A storm, a great fish, 3 days in its belly. And in the end, he realized that he had no choice but to accept his calling. Are you running away? Are you trying to ignore God's voice calling you? Remember, you can run, but you cannot hide forever. Hezek 3. The one who delayed, some don't run, but they hesitate. King Hezekiah was once a good king, but when God told him to prepare for his death, he pleaded for more time. God granted him 15 more years, but those years became a period of decline and mistakes. Delaying is not always a wise choice. Perhaps God is calling you to step into your destiny right now, but you are still waiting. You are still hesitating. You are afraid of losing what you have. You are unsure if you are capable. But remember, a calling is not an open invitation forever. If you do not step in, God may choose someone else. Atheos, you must step out of your comfort zone. You cannot step into your mission while clinging to comfort. Paul was once a powerful Pharisee before he became an apostle of Christ. He had fame, status, and everything a Jewish leader of his time could desire, but he gave it all up to follow Christ. But whatever were gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. Stepping into your calling means accepting sacrifices. You may have to leave behind what is familiar. You may face opposition. You may be misunderstood. You may be tested in ways you never imagined. But if you never dare to step out, you will never know who you are truly meant to become. No one can do this for you. In the end, what sets you apart is not just that God has chosen you, but how you respond to that choice. God may have a plan for you, but if you do not dare to step into it, that plan will remain only untapped potential. You cannot wait for someone else to live your life for you. You cannot expect someone else to take on your mission. Joseph could have chosen to accept his fate as a slave, but he didn't. David could have chosen to hide from his anointing as king, but he didn't. Esther could have chosen to remain silent when her people were in danger, but she didn't. And neither should you. No one can do this for you. You must step into the calling that God has placed on your life. And conclusion, it's time to answer the call. Imagine standing before a door. You know that behind that door lies your destiny. A life not just ordinary, but powerful, purposeful, and meaningful. But that door will not open by itself. You must have the courage to step through. Remember, many are called, but only a few are truly chosen. Because only a few dare to answer. Will you be one of them? The door is in front of you. It's time to step in. The chosen one. Now is your time. Every great story has a turning point, a moment when the main character must decide. Will they keep running, or will they rise and embrace their destiny? Look back through history, from the pages of the Bible to the myths and epic tales. The chosen ones always have a defining moment. A moment when they cannot turn away, cannot delay, cannot wait any longer. They cannot say, not now, maybe later. Because the truth is, you cannot escape what God has destined for you. And if you wait too long, you may miss the chance to fulfill the mission He has entrusted to you. So the real question is, do you recognize that now is your time? signs that your time has come. Maybe you feel it deep inside, a restlessness, an invisible thirst, a quiet but powerful voice whispering in your mind, go. Rise up. Do what you were born to do. But instead of acting, you hesitate. You tell yourself you're not ready. You wait for a clearer sign, a more definite confirmation. Look at the figures in the Bible, those who stood at the same crossroads as you. Esther, the young woman who had to decide the fate of a nation. Esther had no idea she was born to be a queen until her defining moment arrived. When the Israelites were threatened with destruction by King Xerxes' decree, she could have remained silent and continued living in the luxury of the palace. But then Mordecai spoke words that woke her up. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? And Esther had to decide, would she stay silent or would she step into her calling? She chose to act, and because of that, an entire nation was saved. Perhaps you too are standing in such a moment. Maybe you are being called to something you never thought you were strong enough for. But remember, God does not call the ready, he equips the ones he calls. Don't delay like Moses. Moses is a perfect example of someone who hesitated too long before accepting his calling. When God appeared in the burning bush and told him to rescue the Israelites, Moses kept giving excuses. Who am I to do this? I am not good with words. Send someone else. God patiently answered every one of his objections. But if Moses had continued to delay, God could have chosen someone else. The same is true for you. If you keep hesitating, the opportunity may pass you by. It's time to stop looking for reasons to wait. It's time to step out. Those who run always have to return. You may think that if you don't act now, you can still do it later. But history has shown that the chosen ones cannot escape their destiny. 1. Jonah, the man who tried to run away. Jonah was called by God to go to Nineveh and preach repentance. But he hated that city. He didn't want to do it. So he boarded a ship and fled in the opposite direction. But you know what happened next? A storm. A great fish. 3 days in darkness. And in the end, Jonah realized that he could not run from God's calling. You might be doing the same thing. You know, God is stirring something in you, but you keep trying to ignore it. You drown yourself in work, in a busy life, in distractions. But where can you run? God will keep calling you. And if you don't step forward willingly, he may put you in a situation where you have no other choice. The invitation won't last forever. This may be the hardest truth. Opportunities do not last forever. If you reject your calling, God can choose someone else to do it instead. Solomon was once the wisest king, but when he turned away from God, his throne crumbled. Saul was chosen as king, but because of his disobedience, he was replaced by David. Do you want to end up like them? Or will you step into the calling that God has for you? It's time to rise. Now is not the time to be afraid. Now is not the time to keep delaying. Now is not the time to wonder if you are capable. Because the truth is, God has called you. And if he has called you, he will also equip you. Maybe you feel unprepared. But remember, David was just a shepherd boy when he was anointed as king. Gideon was just a timid farmer when God called him a mighty warrior. Paul was once a persecutor of the church before becoming one of the greatest apostles. They didn't wait until they felt ready. They simply said, "Here I am, Lord. Use me." What will you do? This is your moment. Will you step into your destiny, or will you let it pass by? Will you act, or will you keep waiting? Remember, God is not looking for perfect people. He is looking for willing hearts. If you feel a stirring inside, a pull you cannot explain, know that it is God calling you. The only question that remains is, how will you answer? The chosen one. The enemy won't stop you at the start, but will hold you back in the middle of the journey. Every great journey has a beginning, a moment when light bursts forth in your mind, when the path ahead seems clearer than ever before. You start with passion, with an unshakable belief that God is leading you. But then, one day you find yourself walking in darkness. The fire that once burned brightly has dimmed. The clear signs from God that guided you at the start seem to have disappeared, and that is when the enemy appears. The enemy always waits in the middle of the journey. When God places a mission in your heart, He doesn't just see your starting point, He sees the entire journey. But do you know who else sees it? The enemy. It doesn't stop you when you first begin. It doesn't block your way when you are full of faith and passion. No, it waits. It waits until you are halfway through, when you start to grow weary, when you begin to doubt yourself, and that's when it strikes. The Israelites, those who stood in the middle and wanted to turn back. The Israelites are a perfect example. Imagine being one of them. You have seen the impossible. A massive sea parting before your eyes, but a dry path opening through the ocean. You walked through it while behind you, the entire Egyptian army was swallowed by the raging waters. You ate manna from heaven every morning. You saw water flow from a rock just because a man touched it with his staff. You had all the proof that God was leading you. And yet, now you stand in the wilderness and all you see is sand upon sand. You begin to doubt. You start asking, where are we going? Are we really heading toward the promised land? You start thinking about Egypt, the place where you were once a slave, but at least had food, shelter, and stability. You want to turn back, mid-journey exhaustion, the enemy's classic strategy. This doesn't just happen to the Israelites. You might be in the middle of your own journey right now. Maybe you started a new ministry, but now you feel rejected, misunderstood, isolated. Maybe you took a new job that you believed God led you to, but now it's harder than you ever imagined. Maybe you're chasing a dream, but now it feels like you're fighting alone. When the enemy sees that it can't stop you from starting, it will try to make you quit in the middle. It whispers in your ear, "This is getting too hard, isn't it? Surely God doesn't want you to suffer like this." Maybe you misheard him. Maybe you should just go back. But do you know what? Those are the exact words it whispered to the Israelites in the wilderness. And if they had given up, they would have never set foot in the promised land. Opposition doesn't mean God has abandoned you. One of the most dangerous lies the enemy wants you to believe is that if things are getting hard, it must mean God is no longer with you. But that is not true. Remember this: Joseph was sold into slavery and imprisoned before becoming the ruler of Egypt. David was hunted like a criminal before becoming the king of Israel. Paul was beaten, imprisoned, and persecuted, yet he wrote most of the New Testament. They all endured their hardest trials right before stepping into their true calling. Don't turn back. Imagine if Joseph had given up in prison. Imagine if David had stopped believing in God's promise that he would be king. Imagine if Paul had decided to quit after the first time he was beaten. Do you think we would have their stories in the Bible? No, because the enemy may have tried to hold them back, but they did not turn back. And neither can you. God has brought you too far for you to quit. Now look back at your journey. Remember why you started. Remember how God brought you this far. He didn't bring you halfway just for you to quit. Don't let exhaustion stop you. Don't let fear hold you back, because the enemy knows something you may not realize yet. You are closer to what God has promised you than you think. It knows that if you keep walking, if you don't stop, if you hold on to your faith, you will reach the place God has destined for you. Hold on. The battle is almost over. If you feel like you're in the wilderness right now, remember, this is just the middle of the journey, not the end. When the Israelites stood before the Jordan River, right before entering the Promised Land, they faced one final obstacle. The Jordan River didn't part automatically like the Red Sea. They had to step into the water before the miracle happened. Maybe you are standing before your own Jordan River right now. You don't see a way through. But remember, miracles don't happen when you wait. They happen when you step forward. So keep going. Hold on to your faith. Trust that God has brought you too far for you to turn back now. Because you are not just anyone. You are chosen. And the chosen do not quit. The chosen one. God honors not just the beginner, but the finisher. The chosen one is not the person who rushes into a great start only to collapse halfway. The chosen one understands that faith is not a sprint, but a marathon. This world is full of people who once had a glorious beginning, those who were filled with passion in the early days, who ignited a blazing fire and boldly declared that they would never falter. But then what happened? The fire faded. They slowed down. They stopped. They looked around and saw that the journey was too difficult. They looked back and thought that perhaps returning would be easier, but not you, because you are not someone who starts and then gives up. You are the chosen one. Those who start but fail to finish. The Bible is full of examples of people who began strong but never reached the finish line. Look at King Saul. At first, he was admired by everyone, tall, handsome, and full of leadership qualities. When God chose him, people thought, yes, this is the king we need. But Saul did not finish his race. He was consumed by insecurity. He followed his own desires rather than obeying God's will. He ignored warnings and brought destruction upon himself. Imagine if David had been like Saul, starting with great potential but never finishing. But David was different. David made mistakes, but he always returned to God. He understood that victory does not belong to the fastest runner, but to the one who never gives up. How far have you come? Take a moment to reflect on your own journey. Is there something God has given you that you have not yet completed? A book you started writing but abandoned? A ministry God placed on your heart, but you hesitated out of fear of failure? A person you know you must forgive, but you keep delaying because of pride? You cannot expect God to bless you with something new if you have not yet completed what He has already given you. God does not just honor those who start well, He honors those who are faithful until the end. The chosen one does not delay. Did you know that delay is a form of disobedience? If God has called you, but you keep postponing due to fear, laziness, or self-doubt, then you are wasting precious time that could have been used to walk in your calling. Think about Jonah. God called him to go to Nineveh to warn the people. But instead of obeying, he ran in the opposite direction. He thought he could delay. He thought he could escape the task God gave him. But God did not forget. A storm arose, a great fish swallowed him, and inside the fish's belly, Jonah realized that he could not run from God's calling. The question is, will you wait until you are swallowed by a storm, or will you obey now? Finish before the door closes. There is something terrifying that many people do not realize. Opportunities do not last forever. Look at the Israelites. When they neared the Promised Land, Moses sent 12 spies to scout the land of Canaan. 10 of them returned with a fearful report. The land is too strong. We cannot conquer it. Only Joshua and Caleb believed that God would give them victory. But instead of trusting God's word, the Israelites listened to the fear of the 10 spies. They delayed, they hesitated, they refused to step into the Promised Land. And God shut that door. They wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and only the next generation was allowed to enter Canaan. Do not be like them. Do not let fear and delay cause you to miss what God has prepared for you. The promise is ahead, but you must finish. Jesus made it very clear. The one who endures to the end will be saved. Matthew 20:24. It is not the one who starts well who is saved, but the one who perseveres to the end. You cannot expect to receive the reward if you stop halfway. You cannot expect to reap the harvest if you give up in the middle of the season. You started well, but will you endure until the end? God has chosen you. Do not give up. You are not ordinary. You are not just another person passing through life with purpose. You are chosen, and the chosen one does not just start well, they finish what they have begun. So rise up, finish what God has placed in your heart, because if you do not complete it, who will? The chosen one, what burden do you need to let go to move forward? There's something peculiar about those who are chosen. They always have something to carry on their shoulders. It could be a mission, it could be a promise, or perhaps it could be a burden. When God calls you into something greater, you cannot move forward with hands weighed down. You must let go. You must release the things that are holding you back. And the question for you today is, what are you carrying that you should have left behind? The journey of the chosen is not for the bound. The chosen one cannot run with chains on their feet. Imagine an athlete preparing for the most important race of his life. He has speed, endurance, and the desire to win. But there's one problem. He's carrying a heavy backpack filled with stones. Every step is slowed, every breath is heavier because of the weight he has chosen to bear. How can he possibly win? That's why the Apostle Paul said, "Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." Hebrews 12, verse 1. You cannot run fast if you are bound. You cannot step into your calling if you are still holding on to the things pulling you back. So be honest with yourself. What burdens are you carrying? The burden of fear. Every chosen one faces fear. Moses feared he wasn't capable. Jonah feared he would fail. Gideon feared he was too weak. But God doesn't call the brave. He calls the fearful and makes them brave. Look at Peter. At first, he was just an ordinary fisherman. He had no power, no advanced education, and he was afraid. When Jesus was arrested, Peter denied him 3 times. Why? Because he was scared. But after Christ's resurrection, Peter let go of his fear. He became a great leader, preaching before thousands without hesitation. What changed? He no longer let fear control him. You can do the same. Are you willing to let go of fear and step into your calling? The burden of doubt. Doubt is a dangerous enemy. It whispers in your ear, did God really call me? Am I truly good enough? What if I fail? These whispers can kill your dream before it even begins. But remember Abraham's story. God promised him he would be the father of many nations. Yet, years passed and he still had no child. Doubt crept in. His wife, Sarah, even suggested he have a child with Hagar, thinking perhaps God had forgotten his promise. But God had not forgotten. At the age of 100, Abraham saw God's promise fulfilled. He may have doubted, but he never abandoned faith. Do you dare to believe that God still has a plan for you, even when everything seems delayed? Are you ready to let go of doubt and walk in faith? The burden of toxic relationships. Not everyone can walk with you on this journey. Sometimes to step into your calling, you must release those who are not meant to walk that path with you. Think of Lot and Abraham. When God called Abraham, he told him to leave his homeland. But Abraham brought Lot with him. And what happened? Conflict arose. Their livestock became too numerous. The land was not enough for both. In the end, they had to separate. And only after Lot left did God continue to bless Abraham and reveal more about his future. Sometimes you cannot receive what God has promised until you release the relationships that he never intended for you to keep. Who in your life is holding you back? Who is telling you that you're not good enough? Who is making you doubt yourself? Maybe it's time to let go. The burden of resentment. There's something many don't realize. Resentment is an invisible weight. Have you ever wondered why you feel heavy, even when everything in life seems fine? It could be because you're still holding on to old wounds. You still remember the hurtful words someone said to you. You're still angry about what they did. But remember, Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers. It's not he had every reason to hold resentment. But instead of letting bitterness control him, he chose to forgive. And that choice paved the way for him to become a ruler in Egypt. Are you holding on to resentment? If so, let it go, because the chosen one has no room for bitterness. Will you hold on or let go? God is calling you into a new season, but you cannot step into it if you are still carrying the burdens of the past. Take a look back. What is keeping you bound? Fear, doubt, toxic relationships, resentment. Remember, the chosen one cannot be bound, so lay it down, let it go, and walk freely into your calling. The chosen one. Obedience leads to blessings. There will come a day when the chosen one stands at the threshold of a new path. God has called. But will they obey? There is one thing you need to know about the chosen ones. They are not the smartest, the strongest, or the most talented. They are simply the ones who obey. If you feel like God is silent, if you are waiting for a sign but see nothing, perhaps he is waiting for you to do what he has already commanded. Do you know that delayed obedience is also a form of disobedience? Do not let hesitation prevent you from receiving the blessings God has prepared for you. Because in God's kingdom, miracles only happen after obedience. The calling of the chosen one. Imagine standing before a door. Behind that door is everything you've been praying for. Miracles. If breakthrough. Protections. You pray, you weep, you keep knocking. But the door remains shut. You begin to wonder, does God not hear me? Does he not want to bless me? Then you look down at your hand and realize that God gave you the key long ago. The problem is not the door. The problem is that you have not used the key God has given you. So the real question is, what has God told you to do that you have yet to do? Show no next step until you obey the first. Have you ever read the story of Jonah and wondered why God did not speak to him a second time from the beginning? God told Jonah, go to Nineveh and preach against it, Jonah 1:2. But instead of obeying, Jonah ran away. He boarded a ship trying to escape from God. And what happened? A storm arose, the sailors panicked. Jonah was thrown into the sea and swallowed by a great fish. Had God never changed his command. It was only after 3 days in the belly of the fish, when Jonah surrendered and prayed, that God spoke to him again with the exact same instruction, go to Nineveh. God does not give you the next step if you have not completed the first one. Maybe you are asking God, Lord, is your next plan for me? But he is asking you, have you done what I told you to do last time? Obedience unlocks miracles. Do you remember the story of Naaman? He was a great commander, but he had leprosy. When he sought healing from the prophet Elisha, he expected a grand miracle, perhaps a powerful prayer, a special ritual. But Elisha simply told him, go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. Naaman was furious. It was too simple, too ordinary. He almost walked away, but if he had, he would never have been healed. Only when Naaman obeyed and dipped himself in the water 7 times did his flesh become as clean as a child's. What does this mean? The miracle was already there, but it was only activated through obedience. Are you waiting for a miracle? Perhaps God has already given you an instruction, but you have not followed through. Obeying even when you do not understand. True obedience is not about following when it makes sense. It is about following even when it does not. Do you think Noah fully understood why God told him to build a massive ark when there had never been a flood? Do you think Abraham understood why God told him to leave his homeland without revealing the destination? Do you think the disciples understood why Jesus told them to forgive 70 times 7 times? No, but they obeyed, because obedience is not based on understanding, it is based on faith. Delayed obedience is still disobedience. Many people think that as long as they do not say no to God, they are obeying, but they forget that delay is also disobedience. Do you remember the story of King Saul? God commanded him to completely destroy the Amalekites, but he did not obey immediately. Instead of fully carrying out God's orders, he kept what he thought was good. But God does not accept partial obedience. Because of this delay, Saul lost his throne. So if God has told you to do something, do not wait. Do not delay until everything is perfect. Do it now. Take action today. Now, be honest with yourself. Is there something God has told you to do, but you have not done it? Are you waiting for God to give you more direction when in reality, he is waiting for you to complete the first step? Are you hesitating, thinking you need more time, when in truth you simply need to obey? The chosen ones are not the most skilled, not the strongest, but the most obedient. So do not wait any longer. Take action today, because the miracle you are waiting for might be waiting for your obedience. The prayer of trust and obedience. Almighty God, sovereign Lord of eternity, I bow before you, my heart filled with both reverence and hope, because I know that you are the faithful God who never abandons those who belong to you. Today I come before you not to demand, but to surrender, not to seek my own desires, but to receive what you have prepared for me. Lord, Mold me according to your will. Remove from me anything that hinders me from drawing closer to you. Teach me to obey, even when I do not fully understand your plan. Lord, I no longer want to walk according to my own will. I do not want to control my future with these limited hands. Lead me, O Lord. If you call me to step into deep waters, I will walk like Peter. If you ask me to surrender what I love, I will let go like Abraham. If you command me to wait, I will be patient like Joseph in prison. Lord, I trust you. Even when I cannot see the path ahead, I will trust. Even when storms arise, I will trust. Even if it costs me everything, I will trust, because you never break your promises, because you are the faithful God. So today, I choose to obey, without hesitation, without question, without delay. Let your will be done in my life, O Lord, in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.